Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 3rd budget hearings. As a reminder to the listening public, this will be rebroadcast on Friday, August 7th at 7 p.m. and Saturday, August 8th at 2 p.m. As a reminder to the presenters and the council, if everyone can make sure the microphones are on and speak close to the microphone so it can be heard. Our first item is Finance and Human Resource Overview. Gene, let the games begin.
Good afternoon, Gene Rowenhorst, Director of Finance for the City of Sioux Falls. And I hope this doesn't turn out to be games. We've got a lot to do here. There's been a lot of work done, and we're very proud of what you're going to see over the next 3 days. And but I think it's good news and things we should feel good about. Well, we want to do a couple of things today, but one of the couple of things we want to do is talk about what this budget is and is not. First thing up, the budget is a wise use of taxpayer resources to purchase valuable outcomes. We are trying to find the best way to get the biggest bang for your buck that we have in this transaction. It's not just a spending plan. One of the things that you will see as we go through this is that we believe you cannot look at just for next year going forward anymore. That's just something that's not a real option. We've got to look forward 5 years, sometimes even 10 years to at least get some idea of what we want to do. It's about this budget. What you're going to find that we will recommend is about maintaining current service levels. With the economics that have occurred in the country in the last 12 to 18 months, things are changing, and there is some impact that it's going to have on us. It's not a growth budget. The only growth that we're going to have in FTE are being funded by the federal government for 3 years, but other than that, there's no growth in this budget. What you're going to find out is that everything that we had available has been taken up by increases by rate and not by volume. It's a blueprint for meeting the current and future services of our demands of our customers, who are the people of the city of Sioux Falls. And it's a 1 year. It's a 1 year decrease or increase. So keep in mind that we're looking at 1 year, but we really have to look forward in order to be effective in what we want to do. The 2010 budget is a $337 million plan. It includes spending for the city on operating capital and debt service. That's all covered in the $337 million. It's an 18.2% decrease from 2009, and that was given to us, or essentially a result of several things happening. Primarily the discontinuance of items in the bonding process. Lewis and Clark was completed, flood control was completed, and the railroad relocation were completed. This is for budgeting purposes, so they don't show up in this year's. That doesn't mean they're not yet to be completed, but they're out of our budget, and that's the big items that brought down the amount of the budget and got us to the 18.2%. One of the other things you're going to see is that it focuses on infrastructure and public safety. Those are the two main items as we went through the budget, and the main items where you'll see that we're spending most of our money. And incidentally, if you want to stop me at any time, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'm going to rattle on. But if you want to stop and ask some questions at any time, that'll be fine. You don't have to wait until the end. What services does your money buy? $337 million worth. The biggest thing, the biggest items out here are the enterprise funds and the highways and streets. are the biggest items in this program. It's 42% of the infrastructure of utilities and services. There's also 17% public safety and health. So 17% is going to police, fire, and the health department. And then 12% goes to culture and recreations, and we'll be reviewing some of those later today. Where does the money come from? Well, the money comes from primarily taxes. It's 46% of the revenue is coming from taxes, and the other large one is charges for goods and services, and that is primarily things like our enterprise funds that are coming out there. What we've done is we put together a blueprint for the coming year, but the first thing I want to, before I get into that too deep, I want to go back and just remind everyone of what we did several months back. The problem that we had, that we recognized when we started the year 09, actually back in 08, was that we had to figure out a way to, as a contingency, to control our expenses for this coming year in the light of the economic downturn that we were having. And this was really a three-step process that we went through and that we have been working. We've been executing it throughout the year, and it seems it will be working and get us where we want to go. The first line of defense was reduction in expenditures. And if you'll recall, and we've been talking about it, we have a holdback essentially of projects and of funds equal to about 5% of the budget. Those were identified early on as possible items that would not be completed or transacted if the economic situation did not improve. The second line of defense that we were working on and in our model was to modify budget growth. And we've pretty much done that this year. As far as growth goes, like I said, we have everything that we have in a budget from year to year. The increase that we were looking at actually was eaten up by rate as opposed to volume. And by that I mean the rate of fuel has changed, but we've still got to buy the same amount in volume. So it's a rate volume issue. The last item on our agenda that we put in place back in the first of the year was to use the unreserved fund balance. And we will be recommending a use of unreserved fund balance for the 2010 budget. In building a blueprint for our budget, our primary one that we're looking at is the operating fund, and we will focus primarily on the forecast as opposed to anything else. And we will be looking with this general overview that I've just gone through for the entire budget as a whole, and with the staffing plan and the capital program. These things are going to be looked at as we go through the total process of reviewing the proposal, primarily because they all work together so closely anymore. We've got them intertwined with one another that we really can't make any real changes to the staffing plan or the capital plan or in the individual departments without looking at them as a working tool and a living thing that really works together. And so we want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. Putting up the first time, this is the forecast for 2010, graphical look at it. What this forecast is based on is a 3% CPI increase that is given to us by state law, and we have a growth rate of 2.4%. That growth rate is one that is will not be final. It will be something different than that, but it is one that comes from the county treasurer's office as far as what they're seeing as the growth rates. The
Gene,
graph
can I
that
ask
you
you-
look.
Gene, excuse me, you mentioned we could ask a question
Sure.
anytime. As far as the property tax increase, will it be 3%? And then you're saying as far as the growth in our economy that it might not actually be 2.4%, but something different. But as far as the increase that we're allowed by state law, is it going to be 3%?
That's what we're recommending.
Okay, thank you.
That together with the 2.4% growth, which growth is actually new construction basically that we get. So the rules in the book, rules as far as the state goes, we get the lower of 3% or the CPI-W, just a certain sector of the CPI. So, and right now that is at, we've got that set at 3%. And then we have a 2% growth rate that we get for all new construction. We get to take that on without reference to the 3%.
The reason I asked is because in the Argus, it was reported that, you know, the property tax increase is going to be 2.4%. So that's the reason I was asking the question.
Well, the Argus did have some erroneous numbers in that.
Thanks for clarifying that.
What you're looking at is a graph, and we're showing you what has transpired to be in compliance with the 25% policy target for the reserves for the general fund. And where the star is at is where we will be at the end of 2010 if our plan would work out exactly the way we have anticipated. The thing that's important to note on there that the line turns down just before the star, and that is the use of fund balance that we will be recommending. That is where we would expect to be in 2010. The thing to look at is that graph turned down also back in about 2002. We turned down, and we went down for a few years, actually up to 2005, and then we turned it back up. And what you're going to see later on in this presentation is that we have a solution to turn the line around, but with the over the long term, this line is going to go down, and it will go down below 25%. This is just where we're at if our plan works out.
Gene, are you going to show us the
Yes.
graph in the future? Okay.
If I can do that momentarily, it'll be there because it's very important. One of the thing that we're doing always to keep in mind is we are buying services that the citizens of the city want us to purchase. And first, the obvious thing is we want to do is what services what is this money buying? In this case, if you look at the graph there, public safety, 39% of the $122 million, which is the general fund, which we're working on now, and not the 337. 39% of that goes to public safety, 17% is going to highways and streets, and then 18% is going to culture and recreation. If you looked at culture and recreation in the prior graphs, that was down closer to 12% of the 337, but when we're dealing now with just the general fund, which is primarily what we deal with, that number is 18%. And we think it is a good spread of funds as the people would probably like, and as the departments need to continue providing the services that they are currently providing. Where does the money come from? 78% of it comes from taxes. I'm sorry. 95% is 95 million. 78% is coming from taxes. The taxes, sales and use tax in this one, and this is just the first penny, is coming in at, we have it on the budget as 47.9 million. Property taxes at $42.9 million, and then we have other miscellaneous items under the category of other taxes for $5.1 million. Sales and use tax growth that we're projecting for this plan. This is the experience up on the board from 2001 to 2010. We are assuming in making our calculations that in 2009 we will have a 2% growth rate in the sales tax. In 2010 we're raising that number to 4%, and you'll see in another later graph in 2011 we take that out to 6%. And continue that straight out for some period of time. We'll have to see how the 2009 works out at 2%. We think it's a pretty good one right now. We're basically break even. We're at 0.4% down on our sales tax that we're collecting, but we've still got the Christmas season and the biggest part of the year to come through yet. So we're using 2%, and we think it's a pretty good amount for this time.
If I can ask a question, Gene, on the 2010 4% increase, is there any particular reason why you think we might have an increase of 4% in 2010 when, there are a lot of economists who are not even sure what's going to happen at the end of this year, with the economy and so forth? Anything special insight there?
Well, if you look at the remaining part of the chart, and we used to draw lines there through them for you, but we haven't. The sales tax growth rate has pretty much been in a 6.5% range since its inception, except for the downturn that took place back in 01 in that area. So that's why we're thinking 4%. The economy's growing. You're starting to hear comments now that we have bottomed out in the recession, but it hasn't really turned up yet. There's a lot to wait and see out there, but it's starting to sound better. And the 2% versus the 6%, 4% seem like a rational selection for the coming year as we come back and come out of this recession and get back up to our more natural growth rates. Okay, next one. Now this is a chart on the property taxes and the inflation, maintaining the services as the cost increases. The thing that we wanted to point out in this is there's a 2-year lag from the time we get a CPI rate to when it actually is impacted. Makes an impact for us. And if you look at the numbers on the top of the charts, both the red and the blue, you'll see the first one there is 2.2% in 05 and 2.2% in 03. And that's the thing we want to point out, that this has got a 2-year lag to it when it really kicks in. So if you take the numbers on across, what you'll see is in 08, the 08 numbers in the red come in and take effect in 2010. What's going to happen in 2011 is the CPI is probably going to be down and actually be negative CPIW. And what that means is you will get no ability to increase any kind of rates on anything as far as costs coming to us. And that's what we wanted to point out. If you look at the red bars up there, that black bar that runs through them is where the 3% cap is. And if any time that 3% is over 3%, we cannot recover that in the coming years. We're blocked at 3%. So if inflation ever went up to 8%, we'd have to eat 5%. And in this year's budget, it just wouldn't work. You literally have to be cutting back on services. So this is a very important item to keep in mind, that we are very close. We're right on the border of having the services that we purchase take off on an inflationary basis, and we're certainly not looking forward to that.
Gene, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I don't understand the red and the blue. What's the difference?
Primarily, it's the 2-year lag that you look at there. So if you look,
So the red is what it actually was, and the blue is what we were able to take.
that's right.
Okay. And what is CPIW? What's the W?
CPIW is primarily wages in the local area. It's wage earners, and I forget there's another little piece to it, but it's primarily wages. Now, as we said, we're trying to put a chart together to come up with a plan, which we have in the budget that we're presenting to you, that will get us the most services that we can and the most value out of what we're doing. But by the same token, we have got some times to go through here. In the 2011 forecast, and this is where we're going to start. Councilman Costello will take you through this kind of one step at a time. At the start, property tax in 2011 is going to be at a 0% increase, and we're still saying we'll get growth of 3%, and that would be somewhat lower than we've experienced in the past, but probably reasonable. So what you can see, the star that indicates there, that's 2010, and you can see in 2011 we continue on a trek, on a step downward on this path. The way this process should really work with the 25%, if we get it going ideally, we ought to drop below the 25% one year, be above it the next year, drop below it the next year, be above the next year, so that over time we average out the 25%. And we make maximum use of the funds then without having too much build up in our account as reserves. You go to 2012, and what happens there is fire station number 11 comes online and the West Side Library comes online. That, when you start looking at the staffing in particular of a fire station, that takes about 15 FTE to staff a fire station. And the West Side Library, that's not nearly as difficult. There's 4 or 5, 6 FTE that come in on that. Sally will give you some details on that, and Bill. But the point is that fire station really clobbers us when it comes online there in 2012. Then you go out to the next final graph. This takes it out to 2013 to 2019. You can see what we do is successfully, we drop below the 25%, and we successfully turn the plan around. In this particular one, we're assuming that the CPI is at 3% and growth is at 3% and the sales tax is at a 6% increase. All of these graphs that we've just looked at all assume, as I said, in 2012, it kicked into the 6%, and that's what we have.
Gene, I'm sorry,
Yes.
the COPS grant is for 9 police officers for this year?
Nine police officers for 3 years, and we have to then carry them on the 4th year.
Okay.
And that's been reflected in these numbers, in these charts. Now, we get down this chart where it drops down to and bottoms out, the blue line actually drops out at about 21% reserves. And it sits there pretty close to there for about a 3-year period of time, and then we can turn it back up by working our model. Also in this time period, in the 2013 to 2019, Fire Station 12 comes online in 2016. So we're still pretty well holding on to our services that we need to do, but the economy needs to come back. With that, keep in mind this is an illustration of what things might look like. Obviously, when we get out there to 2016 and 2019, we're getting out a long ways, but we have to take a look at this so that we can be prepared ahead of time as to what we may have to deal with. It seems to be a process that's working well so far, and we plan to keep on that. Are there any further questions?
Yeah, I do. On that police officer, if I recall, I mean, in here, you're making some assumptions on 11, 12, and 13 of, sales tax growth getting back to 6% and inflation eventually getting back to 3%. And you have accounted for the fire station and the library and the police officers. But if I remember right, our staffing study had determined that we were going to add 4, 5 police officers every other. It was 4 one year, 5 the next year, 4 another year, 5 the next year.
That's correct.
And you've accounted for the 4 under the COPS grant, but have you added in the 5 that presumably would
As
come
I
in
understand
12?
it, they will all be brought up. They're online right now. Why don't we let Bill take care of that, unless there's other questions, because that fits in there.
We can wait until Bill comes in, but, all right, that's fine, thanks.
I was going to ask Gene, with that extra funding from the feds, from the COPS grant, the money that we would have spent for them, what are we going to be doing with that?
That will go back to reduce the use of funds. We'll reduce that, or instead of being 5.7 million, it's been worked out that way. If it's 5.2 million, the money is going back to the unobligated fund balance. We haven't planned on spending it anywhere.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, Bill O'Toole is going to take you through our plan on a citywide basis for staffing, and then we'll come back and talk about the CIP program.
Good afternoon, City Council. Bill O'Toole, Director of Human Resources. As Gene indicated, there's a lot of focus given to the financial forecast in developing this budget, and the same holds true with respect to the development of the staffing plan. When we constructed the 5-year staffing plan for the City of Sioux Falls, we did that with revised expectations with respect to sales tax growth, property tax growth. So when we did our prioritizing of staffing needs, there was a tremendous amount of focus on existing current programs and service needs, taking into account the capital improvement program. And of course, we wanted to align our staffing needs with the mayor and council's strategic priorities. So with that kind of overlay on top of the approach to the staffing plan, the overview that I'd like to discuss today, and I'm going to touch on each of these areas with about 1 or 2 slides each, and we'll move along fairly quickly as well, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But I want to hit real quickly on the functional organization and layout of city government. Sorry, could you go back just a little bit? And the authorized staffing, the employees per 10,000 population. We'll talk about the 2010 personnel costs and the percentage of budget that accounts for that. And we'll look at the summary of the new positions moving forward and wrap up and take questions at the end. The first slide is going to be a quick overview. Obviously, this council is well aware that with respect to budgeting in the City of Sioux Falls, we have 7 different functions in city government and 24 different programs. And just real quickly, those functions are comprised of general government, public safety, highways and streets, health, culture and recreation, enterprise, and urban and economic development. In support of those functions in government, what I'm showing you next is the authorized staffing levels for 2009 and a little bit of history, just by way of comparison. As you can see, in 2009, we had 1,121 employees serving those various areas of government. The next thing I'd like to show you and just share some information with respect to the number of city employees and looking at that by way of comparison of number of employees per 10,000 population. And these have been updated, and we're looking at 2008, so we're looking at actual numbers. And in 2008, what you'll see is based on a population of 154,100, and staffing as of 2008 at 1101, that represents about 71 city employees per 10,000. Now, in the next slide, kind of putting that in illustration for comparison purposes of municipalities, and let me just say that we didn't do any in-depth analysis with respect to what those other municipalities did by way of service. We just want to provide a simple comparison of how that looked against 11 other cities. And you can see there that the only other city in this series that had less per 10,000 population was Omaha, Nebraska, and Sioux Falls coming in again at 71. So just a quick illustration for you. The next slide, what I'm showing you is two different pie charts that talks about those personnel costs as a makeup or as a percentage of the budget. And the one in the upper left-hand corner just looks at the total budget. It says from personnel services, what percentage of the overall budget is personnel services, and it's 32%. If you break it down from the general fund perspective in the lower right-hand corner, the pie chart kind of flip-flops. And again, the general operating fund is where most of the city's operating expenses come from. And from that perspective, out of the general fund of $122 million, 67% or just about $82 million comprise personnel expenses. The next chart gives you a little bit of history, and if you're interested in knowing how does the 67% compare historically, this next chart shows you that we previously had a low of 61% in 2001 and a high of about 68% in 2006. So just to provide a little bit of context in terms of personnel costs as a makeup of the general fund budget. The next slide kind of drills that down to the next level and says of that 67% in personnel costs, how does that break down? And wages and salaries obviously make up the bulk of those personnel services at 72%, followed by retirement costs at 14%, health, dental, and life insurance 10%, and OASI and work comp at 4%. So that gives you a breakdown of those personnel costs. Now the next slide will tell you that how we're allocating those $82 million across those various functions of government. And as you can see from the illustration, public safety is receiving 51% of those dollars at $41.7 million, followed by culture and recreation at $13 million, and highways and streets at $10 million. And those three functions of government that I just mentioned account for about 80% of the personnel costs, and we think that aligns with the mayor and council's priorities in the city of Sioux Falls. And the next slide, this is just a quick summary of now looking forward into the staffing plan out of the general fund. This is a quick summary of where those positions are going by function and what those allocation percentages look like over the next 5 years. And here again, not unlike the breakdown by personnel costs in the 10 budget, moving forward this looks very similar as well in terms of allocation of new employees with 56 new positions over the next 5 years, 30 of those attributed to public safety, or 53.6% of all new positions in the general fund, followed by culture and rec and highways and streets. And there again, if you take those top three priorities, you're about at 82%. So a very similar picture by way of function of government. And let me just wrap up real quickly by simply saying that this is a 5-year plan that works within that forecast model. It was constructed that way. We believe that it smooths costs out over time instead of experiencing highs and lows from year to year. It emphasizes funding stability, obviously recognizes the impact of CAP. We've accounted for those fire station and that library, for example, in our planning process. And it allows us to allocate those staffing resources consistent with the stated priorities that we have. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Bill, can you take a stab at that, the police hires then? The way I look at it, you've got 30 new hires in the budget for the 4 or 5 years. So 15 for the fire and 12. So you got 15 police
Right.
officers over the 5 years.
And if you remember, and I don't know if you have your budget books with you, in the staffing plan that was communicated in that binder, there was a little bit of a revision that was made to that 5454 because of the financial forecasting that was done. Actually, instead of 2 years getting 9, it took 3 years to get 9 under that forecast model. So what you've done is, in essence, you just got there in kind of that first year, so to speak, and what you're doing is you're just playing catch-up in those other years. So there isn't any new positions coming on board until such time as that gets caught up. So you'd have 9 positions hired right away, and then you'd then bring on your new positions, or any new positions and the existing ones starting in 2013. And hopefully that makes sense. Because under the plan, I think you're going 4 and 10, 3, and then 2 for your 9.
Yeah, Bill, when we take a look at city salaries, many times I hear from state employees, that state employees are getting less than city employees, and also when you hear from county employees, they're saying they're getting less than city employees. I'm glad we're doing very, very well in compensating our employees. But do we have any sense as to the salaries that we give to our city employees, how that compares to the private sector here in Sioux Falls? In other words, are we paying more, about the same, or less than the private sector? I know it's an impressionistic
Sure.
view,
And I can appreciate the question. What we have tried to do, and as this council knows, we recently conducted a compensation and benefits study to take a look at that very issue. And if I just kind of take a look at a macro view of the results of that study, it came back very different than it did 10 years ago when we did the previous study, where we were identified as lagging the market significantly, and we had to make some very, I think, categorize some painful adjustments over a 3-year period. There were some significant increases that we had to make in city salaries because of it. Today, we're in a very different situation. The study that was conducted actually came back and showed that our wages were competitive in the marketplace and consistent, I think, with our payment philosophy, where we want to position ourselves slightly above the market so that we remain competitive in the marketplace. So those results did indicate that, and what you see in this budget is, I think, a realistic position and helps keep that position in the marketplace. Where it is.
Actually, when you're talking about the marketplace, I mean, those studies that we had, that was comparing with other cities, wasn't it? City employees with other
It was,
city employees?
but there was also a component that pulled in published data, which also included some private sector analysis. So it took a combination where that data existed in both sectors and came back with a blended rate to kind of tell us where it was.
So in comparison to the private sector, you would say we're just about even with the private sector here in Sioux Falls?
Depending on what positions you talk
Yeah.
about. For example, you're going to have needs, obviously, for accountants in both the public sector and private sector. And obviously, there was published private sector data that our consultant could pull in and use as additional data to help do some analysis, and they did do that.
And just one other quick question. Let's hope this doesn't happen, but if the economy would get worse and worse and worse here in Sioux Falls, in dealing with city employees, do we have any way of, in trying to deal with a crisis situation, to reduce their salaries, or just simply do we have to lay people off? Do we have some flexibility, I guess is what I'm wondering.
We do have some flexibility, and what I would suggest is that, Gene mentioned it at the highlight of his planning process, that, and I talked about this back in March when I came and talked before this body, our contingency planning efforts. And if you remember those kind of 3 phases that we're going to follow with respect to accounting for those kind of things. So we're in this constant mode of being able to plan, prioritize, and continue to move forward. Again, recognizing the first line of defense of reducing expenditures, because obviously nobody wants to get in that scenario where you have to lay off people.
Yes,
Second line of defense is dealing with that budget, modifying budgets and growth, and trying to do cost containment measures that way. And lastly, using that unreserved fund balance in conjunction with that. But Yeah, we're constantly looking at that, and if the economic environment is such that we're not meeting those stated expectations, we'll be looking at all possible means at our disposal to obviously achieve our economic realities, recognizing that one of the last places we'd like to go is layoffs.
Yeah, in terms of contracts, so that we have with the different unions, I mean, are there any provisions there that would say, hey, instead of laying people off, we could have a reduction in wages, or do we just have to lay people off?
Well,
I mean, is there any flexibility in the contracts that we have with them?
Not necessarily. I mean, just by way of the contract itself, if you're into a situation, the only thing that is spelled out is the existing layoff provisions. Now,
I see.
I think administration would come in and look at some of these other measures that I just talked about to try to avoid that situation. But, if we were confronted with that, that would certainly be an option. But, obviously without getting into any types of strategies and whatnot as it relates to collective bargaining, but we're obviously going to utilize all resources.
Councilor Brown?
Bill, with that 10-year wage study, does that include a study of the benefits package as well, or is it just wages?
No, it did look at some pieces of the benefit structure as well. And to be honest with you, I don't remember any real specifics. There was nothing that jumped out in terms of us lagging the market in any particular way or being overly generous either. But we were very pleased with the results. And I think the work that we have done since 2000 and looking at that data over time and the support of the mayor and council through those years has kept us very competitive.
Thanks.
Other questions? Otherwise, Gene's got a capital program piece. Next.
Okay, we'll take a look-see at the CIP program now, the capital improvement program, and some of the sources and uses. And this will be a high overview of it, but I think the details are back in your budget book that you received. The 2010-2014 program calls for a $471 million plan. As you should keep in mind, that is for the 5-year period. Only the first year, 2010, this plan actually ends up in the budget or in the $337 million. Some of the things that we've really had to pay attention to is coming up with a balance between maintenance and the needs of that and growth that demands. That's always going to be a real balancing act. Do we spend the money on maintaining and refurbishing existing streets, or do we spend money on new construction? And that's gone into our thought process in the CIP program. 68% of the CIP program goes to infrastructure. Infrastructure is streets, water lines, sewer lines, flood type drainage, things of that nature. In the 2010 program, where the money comes from, the money is going to come 41% from sales tax. It's coming from going into the CIP program, and then you can see all the other sources. The biggest are users' fees and state loans. And state loans are the ones that you see a lot of. The SRF loans is what goes into that category. But the big chunk is the sales and use taxes, providing 71%. When you take a look at, and that's in this plan. When you take a look at it on a daily basis or annual basis, in 2010, we had 73%. That was in highways and streets. And the .08 is up there. The dark color is also the .08 where that is going in 2010. And 13% goes in parks and recreations, and then 14% goes into all the other departments. In 2011, to look at our plan as it's going forward in 5 years, in 2011, you can look at it. I won't read them over again. And through 2014, the key being, you can see that we're keeping the category of highways and streets, and the main focus of the program with 58% in 11, 63% in 12, 75%, and 78% actually in 2014. So there's a very high portion of the revenue from sales tax going into the plan. And then you can see over a 5-year period of time, which is probably a little better check on what's going on, because as projects move in and out of the plan, a big project can distort things, but over a 5-year average, 69% of the funds are from sales tax are going into highways and streets.
Gene, is that 73% in 2010 primarily due to the 41st Street Bridge?
I guess I can't answer the specific project. That 12 million would be in there, yes. That's for the bridge. So that would be a big one, be one of the bigger projects. Okay, so in wrapping up on the CIP budget and the overview up to this point, it's been a real challenge again, as we had it in prior years, to make wise use of all the resources that we have available and to purchase valuable outcomes so that we get what we should for our money that we're spending as taxpayers. It's one of the key things we were trying to do in this budget was to maintain current service levels. We think we've achieved that through both the capital program and the other program as a whole. And we have a plan going forward on how to deal with the next 5 years as far as reserve balances and assumptions that we've made on the economy as a whole. And we'll wait and see whether that turns out the way we think it will, but we hope so. Any other questions on the CIP? If you what was the page number that was on for the CIP?
17.
Yeah. No. Are we ready to go to general government?
Gina, if I could get some additional information from you, and this goes back to page 14. Since 67% of our general fund is personnel costs,
Yes.
can you give me at a later date the 2009, what you forecast as an actual by function, by department for the personnel costs that we currently have?
We can do that. It'll take a little doing, but we can do that.
I'd like to do that for a comparison standpoint.
Okay. Make sure the notes are taken. Other questions? The first, we'll start going through the departmental reviews right now, and the first one we got on the agenda is the general government plan. This is the part of the city that provides leadership and support to other departments of the city. Out of the total budget of $337,000, 12.6 million goes into general government. And then you have there a pie graph that breaks down the various general government offices and what's included in it. As far as how the general government fits in, again, we're talking about the general fund. 10% of the general fund is what is allocated to the general government area. And the thing to keep in mind on this also is that that's a 10% growth rate, I'm sorry. And then going on down, the operating expenses are up in the general government about 3.1%, that versus the entire general fund being up about 4%. So 12%, it's a pretty small category of the city as a whole. Are there any questions? If not, we will go forward with Culture and Recreation, and Sally Felix will start that one out for us.
Move these down a bit. Good afternoon. Sally Felix with Siouxland Libraries. I'm also joined today by Joel Rosenthal, who's a library board member, and Bill Hoskins, who's the director of the Siouxland Heritage Museums. And Bill will have a few words to say when I'm finished. Library, of course, is part of Culture and Recreation. Culture and Recreation does make up about 12% of the total budget. You can see on the next slide, okay, that one, how Culture and Recreation breaks down. 7% goes to parks, 4% to library, and then the pavilion and the Orpheum share the rest. And obviously, I'm going to talk about the library today. And if you have your books, the libraries starts on page 67. You may or may not know that Sioux Falls has had library service for 123 years. The first library was established in 1886 when the Sioux Falls Library Association was granted a charter by the Dakota Territory. And in 1899, things got going in earnest when the citizens decided to tax themselves for public library service. And I think, obviously I wasn't around, I can't attest to it personally, but I suspect that from the very beginning in Sioux Falls, libraries really were at the heart of the community. And we're still doing many of the same things today that the libraries did back in 1899. We obviously still loan books, lots of other things as well. We are a place where people of all ages, all income levels, all walks of life, all ethnic and racial backgrounds are welcome. We also, these days, do a lot with computers, which you all have heard me talk about before. We do provide internet access and wireless connections, which are very well used by our library customers. Many people nowadays, when you're applying for jobs, you have to apply online. There really isn't any other option. And many people don't have access to do that if they wouldn't have the library to help them. We also proctor tests online for students, especially distance education students. And not that that's a huge part of our business, but it's a pretty regular part of our business. One of the things that our public libraries in the country were actually formed for and established for was to help immigrants coming into the country back in the 19th and 20th centuries. We still do that in Sioux Falls. I do think we are probably one of the early stops for folks who immigrate to our community to get a library card. We are owned by everybody in the community. It goes back to the idea, again, that we are for everyone in the community. And we do certainly consider ourselves an important part of our quality of life. Just a brief overview. We do have one main library and 11 branches and one bookmobile. We, of course, serve not only the city of Sioux Falls, but also Minnehaha County, with the exception of Del Rapids. So our population is upwards of about 183,000 people when you add those populations together. We have a little over, or somewhat over 96,000 borrowers, and you can see our library holdings number there as well. Highlights, looking back, I really should have Joan Reddy do this presentation because Joan Reddy is our Assistant Director for Operations and City Branches, and the main library renovation has been Joan's life and continues to be Joan's life. And I mentioned to Bart Johnson earlier, and I thank my lucky stars every day, that it is that I've got Joan. But we did begin construction on the main library actually in 2008. It was in April of 2008. And then this May, Phase 1 construction was completed in May of this year. You can't really see it. Oh, go back, Krista. I have a commercial. You can't really see it on the slide that I'm looking at. I don't know if you council members hopefully can see it on yours, and I'm hoping the viewing public can see it because that's really where my commercial is aimed at. The main library is open. We have a lot of folks who think it's not. They see all that construction on the south end, which is pretty daunting, and they just kind of assume we are not open. We've put up signs, we've tried, we're using a variety of techniques and ways to assure people that the main library is open, but every day we get calls asking, when are you going to be open? Our branches get asked, when's the main library going to open? So, folks, we are open for business. It's not business as usual because we're pretty compressed, but we are open for business. Okay, Krista, now you can go. This is a shot of the interior of the library. Much of the public space is being done in Phase 2 of the construction, so there's not a whole lot new to show in terms of the public space, but we did want to show that because this is new. And you saw the self-check machines there, and you can see down in the right-hand corner one of our staff members is helping a family check out their library materials at our self-checks. And then the same staff person is doing it the old-fashioned way and helping the person over the desk. But that does give you a sense. If you haven't been into the main library and you'd like to come down and get the tour as it exists today, I'd be happy to do that for you. Okay, our budget looking forward. Let me... keeping up pace here. Again, you can see in the pie chart, obviously our capital program is a big portion starting in 2010 because of the West Side Branch Library. The administrative, technical, and support services makes up about 10%, public service about 41%, and the city's share of the Siouxland Heritage Museum's budget is in the library budget, and that's about 5% of our total budget. We have a number of goals, and you can, and we've attached outcome measures to each one of those goals. I will go through them briefly. The numbers are very one-dimensional, and they're probably pretty arcane to everyone except us library people. But really, I hope to show you some pictures which kind of translate those numbers into activity and people using the library. Obviously, one of our big tasks is to complete the main library and then to start bid the design of the West Side Branch Library and start on that design work next year. One of our measures deals with the amount of square footage we have allocated to library services, and our target is really about 7/10 of a square foot per person. That's kind of a rule of thumb, for a library system that has a main library and a number of branches. One of our other goals for next year is to maintain our service hours. We were able to increase, minimally, but we were able to increase some service hours on the rural side of our program last year because we did get some additional county money to do that. So we want to maintain those hours and certainly maintain our city hours as well. Our next one is to provide a quality library experience with current and relevant materials. These are some shots we took of people using the library this summer. They are actually all out at the Cayley Library. We look at what we call the turnover rate of library materials, and again, I don't want to bore you because it's, again, only us librarians who get excited about these things. But it is a rather important number for us. It tells you, at least in theory, what the average use of any particular library item, book, be it book, DVD, or CD, how many times it's actually borrowed. And since our library system is built on, we want people to use it, we're not an archive, we're not, there for posterity, we're there so the taxpayers get a return on their dollar today. This is a very important measure for us. And another thing, again, is the title and browsing fill rates. We asked our customers in January, we did a survey, and we asked them how successful they were when they came in, finding the specific title of a book or DVD or whatever that they wanted, and then also if they were just coming to find something good to read or good to listen to or good to view, did they find it? And we were pretty happy with our results, and you can see those on this outcome-based chart here on page 72, but we think we can do a little bit better on that as well. And again, per capita circulation, that's kind of a tried and true way of looking of library use. All of these are very standard across the country, probably many of them across the world. I mentioned earlier that one of our new services is access to the internet and wireless access. Again, these are some photos that we took this summer just to illustrate that. The bottom two are from the Cayley branch, and the top one is from Oakview. As I've mentioned to you before, access to the internet has really pretty quickly in the scheme of things become a core service of ours. We do have a variety of online materials and downloadable books and videos and e-books that you can do from your home or your office computer. We are also looking in 2010, we're slated to buy a new bookmobile in 2010. And we really are looking at downsizing our bookmobile. We have one of the really big ones. It's about 32 feet long, and it houses or holds up to about 5,000 items, and it takes 2 people to operate it. So we really are looking to find a smaller vehicle, and there are several, available that I think will meet our needs, that will be able to accommodate about 3,500 or so books and one person to actually operate it. So that is one of our priorities for next year. And that is jointly funded by the city and the county, and we already have the county's share of the money in the bank. Our final goal is to provide quality programs to encourage and promote reading and library use. We're looking at program attendance and adult programs. We haven't done much. We haven't done anything this year with adult programs. We're hoping to shore that up next year, particularly to draw folks into the main library. You can see here we had a program this summer out at Oakview. It was courtesy of the Sioux Falls Ballooning Association, and they did a talk and then an actual demonstration of taking a hot air balloon and lifting it off. It was a lot of fun. Kids programs, another core service that they did back in 1886, I'm sure, and we still do that. It's very, very important for us. We were pleased, the left-hand side, the kids with the masks, we got them into the main library. With our renovation, we've been really short on space, so our program numbers have suffered somewhat, but we were able to get some of the kids in there this summer, which we were very pleased about. More children's programs out at Oakview. Program uses, building 66%, again, that's the West Side Branch Library. Equipment is the bookmobile. There's some other things we're doing as well, some signs and so forth, but the big thing there is the bookmobile. And of course, most of our library materials money comes out of the capital budget. Sources, bond funds, sales tax contribution, and then the financing by the county for the bookmobile. Our major capital program, again, the West Side Branch Library, just to remind people, it's going to be located in Memorial Park at the corner of 26th Street and Discovery Avenue. We hope to get that design process underway first quarter of next year, and we certainly will be involving the community in that process. As you know, it's being funded by bond funds, and the timeline is to design it in 2010, construct 11 and 12, and open in the summer of 12. And one final shot for me before Bill comes up. We thought we'd just remind you about our other branches and then put the dates on there that, well, I should say other city branches because we have 8 county branches as well, but in the city, the current main library opened in 1972. Cayley branch opened in '88, Ronning in '95, Oakview in 2005, and Westside will be in 2012. So that's a branch a decade. Less folks think that we build libraries often. We really don't. Do you have questions for me for now? And then Bill will come up.
Yeah. Sally, the West Branch Library is going to cost $4.3 million. And then when we get it staffed, how much will we be paying per year for staffing the library?
I
Approximately.
should have that. For staffing, I have an estimate of that, if I can find my piece of paper. Shoot. Let me just look here a minute, because I thought I stuck that in here. I don't have it. May I email that to you? What? I'll send it out to all of you. I apologize. I thought I did.
That's fine.
Okay. Bill? Thank you.
Sally, I'm sorry. I couldn't get his attention.
Oh, I didn't see you either. I'm
That's all
sorry.
right. Just a couple of questions. When I look at your expenditures are going up by about 3.4%, and the two biggest ones, without question, are in the items of circulation and children's services. Can you just address those a little bit? Children's services are going up like 11%, and circulation's at 6.5%.
The reason for most of the children's services, and actually that budget went up this year, is because one of our staff members had a baby, and it had a huge impact on the health insurance. It's not the only reason. I mean, there's COLAs and step increases built throughout all of the divisions and in the personnel. The actual operating budget of the children's division hasn't increased that much. But it's amazing, because I understand that question, because when I saw that number, I was quite surprised. And I called up finance, and they said, how can this be? Well, that's how it can be. If we look at what we're actually going to be spending in 2009 over what we're budgeting in 2010, it's not going to be that huge a difference.
So the personnel cost for that particular is assigned to that department, if you will?
Yes.
What about the circulation item?
Circulation, I'm trying to think if there was anything unusual in the circulation department budget, and I don't recall that there was, so I'm guessing it has to do with staffing. And I'll have to go back and really look at that, and I can email that out too, because I'm not really sure.
Would you please? Thank
Sure.
you.
Councilor Brown?
Sally, I have a question regarding the CIP budget in terms of the location of the West Side Library. How much research do we do in terms of making sure that is the right location for that facility? Or is it just because we have land available there?
Well, I think we probably started looking at it because we had land available there. Again, when I bring out my little charts and show where people are borrowing from, that certainly kind of seems to be if we're looking at west of I-29, that's, kind of in the middle from the northwest and the real far southwest. And we like how things have worked out at Oakview, being close to Annie Sullivan and the community center. So I guess we didn't really do a lot of looking at other land, because this one seemed to pretty much fit the bill.
Okay. The reason I ask, some constituents have asked me if we considered pairing up with the University Center. Does that make sense to put the libraries there or not?
It doesn't make sense to me. I know there are folks who are interested in that. Our branches serve primarily kids and popular reading, people for programs, people coming in like they do out at Oakview for internet access. It's heavily, heavily used out there. And we like to think that we like to be in the neighborhood concept. We do like the symbiotic nature, I guess, with the public schools, because it seems to work with our clientele. We like the fact that it is, on a public bus route, if indeed that's how people need to get there. Having a branch library on a community college campus or on a university campus, from our perspective, that's not the model we've used.
Thanks, Sally.
Anything else? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Bill Hoskins, Director of the Siouxland Heritage Museums. Don't get the chance to address the council very often, so I actually look forward to the opportunity. The Siouxland Heritage Museums, we operate two 120-year-old National Register buildings. The Pettigrew Homan Museum, that's owned by the City of Sioux Falls, and the old Minnehaha County Courthouse, that's owned by Minnehaha County. Under a joint cooperative agreement that was established in 1974, the museum has a number of different budgets. We have our operations budget that is funded jointly by the City of Sioux Falls and by Minnehaha County. There is a maintenance budget for the Pettigrew Homan Museum, an annual maintenance budget that is also provided under the joint cooperative agreement by the City of Sioux Falls. Minnehaha County provides for the annual maintenance of the old courthouse museum. We also have a enterprise fund budget and a museum store budget. And those really are the principal budgets that go together to make up the museum's funding. Looking back, I just wanted to remind you, our buildings are free. They're open to the public daily, 7 days a week. Attendance has been up 3% in 2008, and so far this year is holding steady at a 3% growth rate. Last year, we did just over 2,100 tours and educational guided tours and educational programs. The facilities were rented 60 different evenings. We completed 9 different exhibition projects, and we have gotten fairly positive media coverage over the years, mostly promoting our exhibits and programs. The museum staff is the same size today as it was in 1996. The City of Sioux Falls in 2010 were asking for a total of $590,000. That represents approximately 44% of our total budget. The county is, because of the maintenance costs for the old courthouse principally, will end up, our request to the county is $627,000. So they're actually paying about 47% of the total tab for the museums. Another 9% is basically revenue from those two revenue funds, the store and the museum enterprise fund. Looking forward, next year's budget, the operations budget has a small increase. That's primarily in it is entirely in human resources, though, let's see. Those rates include normal step increases, and Minnehaha County Commission has voted for a 1.8% increase, cost of living increase. And I think that's largely due to they had a number of labor contracts where that was a mandated rate. Overall, next year, we're looking at continuing our existing services while we continue to try and capitalize on technology to help bring the museum out to the public a little bit more. We have added a searchable database, access to our museum collection through the museum's website. That was made available through a program called Past Perfect that actually a member of the council donated to the museum. We also are utilizing things like Facebook And the Pettigrew has 90 Facebook friends at the moment. This is something we just started this year. The courthouse has about 197, but those are real fans of the museum and follow it closely. So that's just a little bit about what's coming up. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah. Bill, when you think of museums, you don't think of new buildings, but could you say something about a new building that you're thinking about?
Well, we are facing a little bit of a issue with the old courthouse museum. It's the museum's collection is owned jointly by the City of Sioux Falls and by Minnehaha County. About 90% of our collection storage is at the old courthouse museum, and a large part of that is in the attic of the building. We've have some structural issues with the attic of the old courthouse museum, a number of which have been addressed in a short term. They're addressed through this county's capital program, but ultimately we're really looking at relocating the museum's collection. It's really located in part at the Pettigrew, in the attic in the basement, at part in the old courthouse, in the attic, basement, and every other nook and cranny. And we also rent some space off-site for the museum's collection.
And if I could just, is that going to be in the 2015 CIP? Or?
At the moment, it
Okay.
is not in the capital program.
Oh, okay.
Councilor Flanagan?
Bill, do we have a breakdown of your budget in our operating book?
I do not believe that you do at this time, but I can certainly provide it.
Can we get a copy of that, please?
Yep, I can have it to you this week.
Any other questions? We'll move on to public safety and start off with fire with Don Hill, Fire Chief.
Good afternoon, Council. Don Hill, Fire Chief. Public safety, 15% of the overall budget goes to public safety, and as part of that, we have police and fire. Police is...
Don, can you help us out and tell us what page
Sure.
we're starting?
I believe it starts on 17 in my book.
Thank you.
Public safety consists of police and fire. Police is 9% of that budget, and fire is 6%. Our mission is to protect the citizens and visitors of Sioux Falls and their property from fire and other emergencies, and we do it in three ways, through education, prevention, and emergency management. And the services we provide, you can see, and very important is our fire prevention service, and that involves education, and not only education, but inspection, code enforcement, and investigation. Now, we have 11 people assigned specifically to fire prevention. However, all of our people participate in fire prevention, from the people that you see in the stations to all our training officers. They all do public education, and they all do inspection services. We do public education in three different areas: fire, CPR, and first aid. And then our emergency responses, our primary four areas are, of course, to fires, and then to medical calls, and then also to hazardous materials and rescues. The largest part of our department is our operations division. Out of our 194 people that we have authorized, 186 of them are either firefighters in some capacity or inspectors. 169 of those are assigned to our operations division. Those are the people that work in the fire stations. So we're very heavily dependent on that part of our organization and very heavy in that organization. We have 10 fire stations. Actually, we have 9 today. One will be added later this month. We have a training center on the airport grounds. Our maintenance shop is attached to one of our fire stations, and we have 2 maintenance staff that work on fire apparatus. And then our fire headquarters is attached to the station at 37th and Minnesota. We actually have 20 fire trucks, things that would be considered fire trucks by the public. We have a number of other support vehicles. 11 of those fire trucks are our first line response. The other 9 of those are either cross staff. That means that the crew takes either both trucks or one truck or the other, depending on the call, or reserves. And reserves are very important for the operation of the department. Our next station, as I mentioned, will open this month. That's Station 10 on 10th in Chicago. If you haven't been by there, go by there soon. It looks very good. This is a station that was added to provide better service to the core area of the city. The core area of the city, both north and south of that fire station, had some of the longest response times in our city, and it's also very heavily populated. We added this station beginning in 2000. We bought the land in 2000, and then construction began last year and is about 99% complete right now, and we're hoping to open that, as I said, later this month. We estimate that immediately this station will have over 1,000 calls per year. So it will be a very busy fire station. Since it's built to provide service to an existing area of the city, not a new area of the city, we are just rotating a crew from another station into this facility, so we're not adding any additional staff when we open this fire station. It's providing service and better service to an area in the core area of the city. Our operations division, I mentioned, has 169 people. That's 85% of our budget. They provide emergency response. They work in all the stations. They also do public education and prevention. And then also in our capital program, that point there we have, of the total CIP, not just sales tax. Fire station might seem like a lot, but it's 1.1%. We have 1.1% of the total CIP and 9.2% of OSEP over the 5-year period. In our business, response times equals better service. There's a national standard that we need to meet for accreditation, which is to arrive at 90% of our calls in 5 minutes and 12 seconds or less. Last year, we accomplished that in 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which was a big improvement over 2007, when we actually were reaccredited, and our response time that year was 5:09, 90% of the time, 5 minutes and 9 seconds. And then our fire loss goal is to be below the national average. You can see that that's about 5.6 million for a city our size. Last year was one of our highest years, actually, at 4.7 million. Our 5-year average is about 3.6 million in fire loss. In a city the size of Sioux Falls, if you get 1 or 2 larger fires, that can impact your yearly statistics. So we track that over a 5-year period as well. And like I said, we're about 3.6 million. As far as calls, our calls this year, or 2008, were up 6.3% over 2007. You can see from looking at that our people in our fire stations respond to a lot of medical calls. About 55% of our calls are medical calls. In the life and fire safety education, we were recognized by the accreditation team that came here last year for our education of school children. We enjoy very good fire loss statistics in Sioux Falls. We have a low number of fires, and we have a low fire loss. And part of that has to be because we make an effort that not very many cities make, and that is to go into all of the elementary schools, K through 5, and teach fire education in all of those classrooms. And so that is it's a large commitment on our part, not just our fire prevention staff, but also our people in the fire stations do that as well. And then CPR. For a person to survive a heart attack, you want to have 4 things happen. You want to have them call 911 right away. You want to have bystander CPR, early defibrillation, and then we want to get them to the hospital as quickly as possible. And so we provide CPR education to about 3,000 people in Sioux Falls per year. Another way that we try to reduce the impact of fires is by distributing smoke detectors. We provide those for both at fire headquarters and in outreach programs to people in need, people that don't have smoke detectors or batteries. A lot of that is provided through grants, and the majority of that program is provided through grants. Most people might not realize it, but their homeowner's insurance is largely determined by the fire rating for the city of Sioux Falls. Our rating is 3 on a scale of 1 to 11, 1 being the best that you can possibly have, and 11 means that you don't have fire protection. And we anticipate that in 2010, the ISO, the Insurance Services Office, will be here to reevaluate the city. And we have a goal to maintain what we have, but it's possible that our rating could improve. It's important to note that although our department has about a $21 million budget, we actually save the citizens of Sioux Falls $45 million in insurance premiums by having our department. So we're about a 2-for-1 deal.
Don,
So, yes.
is that a difference between a 3 and 11 or a 3 and a 4?
3 and 11.
Okay.
Yeah. The difference between a 3 and a 2, I'm not sure between 3 and 4, is only about $2 million. So 3 is a good rating. We would save an additional about $2 million if we go to a 2. And that's the ISO rating is made up of a rating of your fire department, your water department, and your communication system, so Metro Communications as well. And about half of that is the fire department's rating. And included in that rating, it's a big formula, but basically coverage of your city, your staffing, and your equipment. They do not take into account fire loss at all for a city our size.
And it seems like in a previous conversation we talked that the benefit of being a 3 was really directed more towards homeowners, and getting to a 2 or 1 is really more towards business insurance.
That used to be the case, but that has changed now. The ISO rating can be used. It's allowed to be used for homeowners as well. It used to be from 4 to 1. There wasn't much of a benefit for homeowners. It was just for businesses. But now a change in your rating, even from a 3 to a 2, can affect your homeowners. And that's depending on the individual insurance company. It's not a requirement by any means. So the insurance companies use this rating to help determine their rates. Most of them do. Not all of them do, but most of them do.
And while there's a potential $2 million savings to get to a 2 rating, which we're optimistic about, what would it take, or what kind of investment would it take to get to a 1 rating, and what kind of return is there?
I looked at this the last time we had the rating, and at that time we would have had to increase our staffing by about 50%. So we have just under $12 million in wages and in wages. We would have had to increase that about 50%. That was the last time we had a rating. So I don't know what that would be at this time yet. So,
Thank you.
The capital uses, we use about equal amounts here between our fire equipment and stations. Next year, we have in the budget a refurbishing and an addition to Fire Station 2, which is on Sycamore. We'll be adding a bay and putting on a permanent exterior on that building. The exterior there is not holding up well. That station was built in about 1991. That's about half of our capital program money for next year. And then also we have one fire truck in there. I mentioned earlier that we have 20 fire trucks, and we try to make them last an average of about 18 years. So about every year, sometimes 2 per year, we need fire trucks. So next year actually happens to be about the lowest cost fire truck that we have that we're replacing, $345,000. The last thing is construction of Fire Station 11, which is scheduled for 2011. As the city grows, I know that most of you have heard this, but we need to plan on building a fire station in one of the new areas of cities about every 4 years if the current rate of growth continues. So about every 4 years, you should expect a station. And this one would open in 2012, and as you saw earlier in Gene's presentation, that is factored into his projections. About 15 people per station to staff at 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Ideal coverage, and this is part of the ISO rating, is about 4.5 square miles of coverage per station. Each station can cover about 4.5 square miles of built-up city. That's ideal coverage. Any questions?
Yes, Don, you mentioned that we had 353 fire calls a year. Of those, how many are actual fire, or are they all actual
The
fires?
353 are the actual number of fires that we have. And just as a comparison, a city our size, according to the National Fire Protection Association statistics, has about 600.
Okay. Also, just one other quick question, or I should maybe say if you could respond to a concern about these new fire stations we're getting. Some people might say they're rather extravagant in their appearance, and they're not very modest structures.
There's been a change in the fire service as we have become, and this is nationwide. We went from single bunk rooms for firefighters to individual rooms, and this was necessary to do because of now that we have both men and women in the fire service, that separation is a good thing. Also, we include classrooms in most of our stations now they're available for public use. They're limited in their public use, and then the new stations, because of the change in mission, really on the national level, as the fire department being a part of the national or response to national defense and emergencies, hence the grant money and terrorism money. We have more kinds of equipment now than we ever have. And so the stations will almost always be built with 3 bays because they will have a specialty such as hazardous material response to weapons of mass destruction, or some certain kind of rescue specialty, which all those things are, adding that capability has increased the size of the stations. And then the other thing maybe that you would be referring to is the exterior. They're brick rather than siding, lasts much, much longer, and we have had problems with our stations that don't have exteriors like that with maintenance, with upkeep. And so we think it's necessary to have that.
Thank you.
Councilor Knudsen?
Chief Hill, as time goes on, are the citizens in the neighborhoods of the new fire stations using the community rooms more and more and more?
I wouldn't say more and more and more. I think we've had a pretty steady use, but it has not increased. They seat about 12 to 15 comfortably. So there has been there's some use for it, but it's kind of a niche market there. Not everybody needs a 12 to 15 room or capacity.
And I don't remember how we kind of let neighborhoods know that we have such a room that they might use for smaller events. I don't remember what kind of marketing we do along those lines.
We haven't marketed it. What we do when we open the station, and we have an open house when we open a station, we tell the people in the neighborhood there. And like I said, we've had some use. It's not extensive. It's primarily used for our firefighters and their education and their training.
Councilor Bennigan?
Don, when I look at your operating budget, the fringe benefit package, and I know you get some of these numbers from HR, so I don't know if you can answer this or not, but the fringe benefits went up significantly higher than the rest of your cost.
Right. I know that is caused by the pension, which must be maintained based on actuarial rates. And if the stock market goes down, we're heavily invested in the stock market, the city's portion of that is going to go up. And there is a 5-year smoothing on that, but it occasionally happens when that goes up, it goes down. But I think it was $400 and some thousand difference for the pension.
Yeah, it went up 10.5%, so that's
Yep.
a significant dollar amount.
Yep.
Councilor Litz?
Say, Don, I just wanted to comment on I took the CPR, my family took your CPR class last year, and it was really good and well attended, and, I'd encourage you to expand on that maybe a little bit. But I was looking your numbers over here for calls, and I see about a third of them says other calls, and I was just curious, what would be your top 3 in that category?
The top 3 would probably be false calls where people think there's a fire or there's an alarm system that goes off. And it doesn't actually end up being a fire. And then another thing is called a smoke scare, which is people see some kind of smoke in the area, and so they assume it's an unfriendly fire.
Like when my kids start the fire pit.
There you go. Those are probably the 3. Yeah.
Thanks, Don.
Any other questions for Don? I just have one question. If I book my 5-year-old's birthday party in the community room, do the fire trucks come with it? Can they play all over them?
If they're not out on a call.
Okay. All right, if there's no other questions, we'll move on to police with Doug Barthel.
I have a request for a 5-minute break.
Want to take a 5-minute break? Sure, you're not going to need 50 minutes, are you? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
Good afternoon. The hearing will begin again in 60 seconds. If council members could please return to their seats. Thank you. And also, Granicus is live.
What's that? Thanks for helping. There's no thinking those are.
Why don't we go ahead and start, Doug?
Good afternoon, Doug Barthel, Police Chief. We're going to give you a little overview of the police budget. I think you probably saw this slide before, but just to emphasize, as a percentage of the total city budget, police department has 9% of that. We currently have 259 employees, and as was mentioned earlier, and you probably saw in the news recently, was very pleased to find out that we were awarded all 9 of the positions that we had applied for through the COPS grant, which I think was fantastic, given the fact that it was a competitive grant. So certainly weren't guaranteed any of those positions. Captain Mark Jensen takes care of our our grant administration. I think you did a fantastic job putting that grant application together. And when I looked statewide, there was a total of 87 officer positions that were requested. Only 30 were awarded, and we got nearly a third of those. So certainly very pleased with that news. Due to the hiring process and so forth, it'll probably be latter 2010 before we actually get all of them hired, and actually by the time they're out and on their own, it'll probably be closer to the end of 2010. But it's good news that we can now take those 4 positions out of the budget that the mayor had mentioned in his address a little over a week ago. So a few of the highlights looking back. As you might recall, we installed new digital cameras in our police cars, and also we are currently in the process of installing new computers in our cars. Everything that the officers do now is pretty much electronically in the car, from the dispatching of the calls, taking the reports, looking up information. They can access email, do things online. They also have to upload their videos through the computer system. The computers that we had in the cars before were 5 years old, and as part of our ongoing revolving fund with computer IT, we finally were able to upgrade those. So certainly the officers are looking forward to that. It's going to decrease their upload time. They currently have to spend time. You might see them parked at various areas around town, particularly fire stations where they have hot spots, and they aren't just sitting reading the paper. They're actually uploading either reports or video from their car. So we're confident that these new computers will cut that time dramatically. We're also in the process of getting rid of our old VHS tape recording system, as we did with the cars. They're now digital. We're also doing that with our interview rooms, so that they're all going to be digital. And we recently upgraded our still photography to a totally digital system. So it's the courts certainly appreciate it. We can get things in a more timely manner, and the quality's been very good. Plus, it has dramatically reduced the amount of storage space that we have to have for inventory or for evidence storage, as well as the cost of the tapes. So, just an overall look at all of our different sections and areas within our department. Obviously, patrol is our largest division within our department. They take up about 56% of our entire budget. Our capital program, we just have a very small part of that, mainly for equipment. For 2010, the majority of that is for patrol vehicles. We have requested 14 police cars for 2010. We generally replace our cars about every 3 years, the ones that are actively on the line, and at that point they usually have over 100,000 miles. Actually, as part of the COPS grant program, and COPS stands for Community-Oriented Policing, and that is a main emphasis of putting in for those officers, and we're going to continue our initiative and to partner with the community. And actually, all the sections in our department play an important role in developing these community relations, and I think that helps play into the part of why we are such a safe city, because we certainly can't do this job alone. It takes the efforts of everyone within our community to work together with us to reach those goals. So obviously the most important area will be the officers on the street. They're our first responders and the ones that you are probably the most visible with. You might recall last year we talked about we had purchased some new software that we analyzed our staffing needs with, and as part of that we changed some of our shifts around, created 2 what we call power shifts, or 10-hour shifts that overlap our 3 8-hour shifts, and the goal, of course, was to better utilize the resources that we have and hopefully use them in a more effective way. As you can see, our average response time is around 8 minutes, but I'm pleased to say that so far, year-to-date, when we compare this same period year-to-date for last year, we've seen a reduction of about 3/4 of a minute in our response time. So it may not seem like a lot, but when you're dealing in just a few minutes, nearly a minute is a considerable decrease. So I'm very pleased with that. And when we look at response times, you talk about 8 minutes, that's the average on priority calls, but that doesn't mean that it takes us 8 minutes to get to every call. If there's, say, for example, a call of shots fired or something of that nature, we're probably going to get there in 2 or 3 minutes. versus if you're calling to report that somebody broke the window out in your car last night, that may take, 12 to 15 minutes. And what's a good average or what's a good standard? It's hard to really compare that because some cities might measure it differently. I know some cities measure from the time that the officer is dispatched to the time that they arrive. Me personally, I like to make sure that we look at from the time you actually call 911 till the time the officer arrives on the scene, because in your mind, that's how long it took for us to get there. You have to look at how cities are laid out geographically, and there are a lot of other factors. And frankly, it's a tolerance level. What do you personally feel is acceptable? If you're standing in the middle of an intersection waiting for an officer to take your accident report, is 8 minutes okay? Is 9 minutes okay? It's just a question of tolerance. So I will say that we have not received complaints along those lines, so I think what we're doing is working. One of the areas that we've taken more of an emphasis on over the last couple of years is our street crimes unit. Here's just a couple examples of many hundreds of photos that we've documented and categorized over the last few years with our street crimes unit to just kind of, we place more emphasis on the graffiti and trying to eliminate that. The tattoos and those sort of things are just an indication of gang activity. And as some of those things continue to grow, it's going to also be a focus of ours as well. Currently, that street crimes unit has a total of 4 members on it. Although they're a small unit, they have a huge impact, I think, in our community. It's been a great effort. So far, or for last year, we documented about 32 gangs, 269 total members. So far, for this year now, we're up to about 35 gangs for a total of 305 members, which may seem like a huge number, and certainly is something that we obviously are placing emphasis on. But I think when people think of gangs, they think of maybe whole neighborhoods taken over, or they're standing out on the corner and that sort of thing. That isn't necessarily the case. We certainly do see gangs, and we see some of the crime that goes along with it, although I'm pleased to say that we don't see some of the issues that other communities might have, and I'm not talking necessarily about bigger communities, because there are some smaller communities that experience bigger problems than we do. I think by being very proactive like we have and documenting these groups, making them aware of the fact that we know who they are, certainly keeps them on their toes and frankly make it uncomfortable for them to even want to set up business here. One of the big areas, of course, is our patrol division and our traffic and the traffic enforcement area. We know from looking at previous data that traffic enforcement has a direct impact on the number of accidents that we might see. Certainly people don't like to get tickets, but by getting tickets we can gain voluntary compliance, and I'd like to see where we don't have to write any, but we do, like I said, notice as the tickets go up, the accidents go down. That doesn't mean that we have to write necessarily piles of tickets just to achieve that, but we tend to focus our efforts on high accident areas, complaint areas, and then we've also increased our saturation patrols, which we receive highway safety funding through the state to help us with that. It's worked great for DWI enforcement through our saturation patrols, and we also emphasize seatbelt usage and things of that nature. One of the areas that we also have highlighted in our budget is our crime lab and our investigative area. There's actually a total of 43 employees that work in those areas. And as you can see, they've investigated over 14,000 cases in 2008. So far, year to date, we've seen a slight increase in that. Our officers respond to over 80,000 calls a year, and of those 80,000, there's about 14,000 that require some type of follow-up. The officers generally, as they respond to a call, will take care of as much as they can on the scene without tying up a lot of resources, but oftentimes there's more follow-up that needs to be done down the road. So those cases are assigned to a detective who then takes over the investigation from there. One of the ways that we can measure how effective our investigations are is our clearance rate. And We've highlighted a couple of these areas. First one is the Part 1 violent crimes, and Part 1 is just a standard that the FBI uses when we do our uniform crime reporting, and it basically includes the major crimes like murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. When we look at that, our clearance rate for 2008 was 65%. May not seem like a huge clearance rate, but when I look at, and this is one area where we can compare ourselves nationally because of the federal standard in reporting these crimes, the national clearance rate for violent crimes is 50.2%. So we've got a considerable increase over what they're seeing on the average nationally. And the other area is the property crimes, the major ones of burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson. Our clearance rate was 46%, and nationally the property rate, or clearance rate for Part 1 property crimes was only 19.8%. So certainly very pleased with that. Never always satisfied with just good enough. We're always looking to try and improve that. So and that is certainly one of our goals as we move forward to try and improve on those numbers. One of the other areas also, and I think probably one of our flagship programs, is our School Resource Officer program. We've had just tremendous success with that. I think it's had a definite impact on the students and the youth of this community as they grow up. Having that positive contact with an officer in the school, and we start at kindergarten, work our way all the way up through high school, I think is definitely helping. We're looking at increasing our traffic enforcement measures in and around the schools. And another program that you may have recently heard on the news, beginning in the fall of this year, we have changed the formerly known as the DARE program now to the new I CAN program, which is basically similar to the same concept as before, drug and alcohol awareness education, but now rather than having 2 12-week programs, we're going to be able to do 3 8-week programs. With the considerable growth of elementary schools, it's just become a matter of resources in trying to effectively use the 3 officers that we have that teach that program. And plus the fact that it's a homegrown version, we work together with the school district. It gives us a lot of flexibility, and we can now change it as the needs arise and make it fit the needs of our community rather than a standard program that they might be set, nationwide. And our last program that I'd like to touch on is our animal control enforcement. We currently have 6 animal control officers, and they are supervised by 1 police sergeant. Those 6 officers responded to over 13,000 calls last year, and so far for 2009, we're almost 400 calls more than what we were at this point last year. But we have taken a proactive approach with them too, and rather more than just responding to calls, we want them to also try and be proactive and initiate contacts as they see animal violations and that sort. And kind of like our traffic enforcement, if we can gain voluntary compliance, I think in the end we'll see less calls and better enforcement that way. That is our budget. I would like to recognize Assistant Chief Patty Lyon and Kay Faber, our administrative assistant. They put in a huge amount of time into this budget. I certainly appreciate all their help on it, as well as the finance team. I know we go through these pretty quick, but believe me, behind the scenes, there's a ton of time that goes into this, and I certainly appreciate that. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Councilor Knudsen?
Chief Barthel, thank you for everything you do for us. I was curious, is there anything new as far as the Police Academy program, as far as budget is concerned? Because I really love that program.
We're still currently doing the Citizens Police Academy. We offer that in the spring and the fall of the year. It's an 8-week program. Matter of fact, we'll probably be posting information, taking applications for that very soon. I believe the next one starts late September. So yeah, it's been a great program just through word of mouth. We normally have way more applicants than we have positions to fill in there, but we certainly over time are able to get most people through the program that want to attend it, and I know several of you have been through it as well. So.
Councilor Brown?
Chief, a couple of questions. First of all, on the response times, is there a police standard like there is for Fire Chief Hill with accreditation, or is that non-existent
Well, like I said, I'm not so sure that there is with accreditation. It so much depends on, the geographics of your city and how you measure it, how the calls are dispatched, and there's so many variables that go into that. Actually, we used to, probably 10 years ago, we measured our response times in the time from dispatch to the time the officer arrived, and so our response was in around 4 minutes and looked really good. But I don't think that was a realistic approach, and this certainly is. But
And then similarly, is there an ISO in police in terms of reducing insurance rates for people based on accidents in a city or not?
Well, not necessarily like that, but I know insurance companies take that into effect. There's a reason that Allstate has ranked us one of the safest cities to drive in the country, although some people might not agree with that, but obviously it's a lot worse in other cities. But I think that definitely they look at how many accidents we have and some of those sort of factors. So there's no question that the police department plays a role in that, and because of our enforcement efforts, we reduce the number of accidents, and which in turn makes it cheaper to drive here.
Okay. And then finally, on the DARE or ICANN programs, is the ICANN a national program that you're tapping into, or is that something you're...
No, it's actually totally homegrown. We met with school district officials, and actually as a group of teachers that came up with a name for that. But it was an idea that came from some of our officers, and we were just looking for a better way to teach it, something that we weren't so tied to. The DARE program, certainly a great program, has worked very well for us and will continue to work well for other communities, but it's pretty structured, and you're tied to that certain curriculum. We sat down with our staff and with school district staff, as well as the Catholic school staff, and came up with a curriculum that we think is going to be a good approach moving forward. Plus, it has that flexibility that we can change it if we need to. One example is bullying that wasn't really emphasized in the DARE program, but we know has become more of an issue. So now we can spend a week or two talking about that.
Great. Thanks, Chief.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Saggers?
Yes, Doug, on the patrol, we have 159 sworn officers. How many of them are supervisors?
Oh, gosh. I'll have to get that to you.
Okay.
I mean, I've got the breakdown by the entire department, but just off the top of my head, each of the 3 shifts has 6 sergeants. Each shift has a lieutenant. So just looking at the patrol shifts, you've got 18, 21 there, and then in the traffic section, there's 2 sergeants and a lieutenant. So that primarily is the patrol division there.
And then also to the SROs, obviously we're not in school right now. What are the SROs doing?
Good question.
During the summertime.
We utilize them in a number of different ways. One of the first ones is the Kids Camp program that we offer to graduates of our DARE program. So those that are in between 5th and 6th grade can go through. It's a 3-day program where they can experience different things that police do. We also work with fire on that, ambulance, just to expose them to some other things, and also talk about some of the other issues like drug abuse and those things. It's been a very popular program and well received. That's a handful of them that do that. A few of them also take care of the bike patrol. You might see more officers out in the downtown area on the bike paths. We're able to specifically assign them to that detail so they aren't called off on other things like an officer as part of the normal patrol shift might be. And we also use them to supplement our regular patrol division. A few of them do that. They actually all rotate, so they spend some time out on patrol, basically so we have some extra officers throughout the summer. And we've also utilized them in other areas of the department, like example for the sex offender registration. Now with the new requirements for that, you have to come in and visit us twice annually, and we have to actually go out to your home and make sure you live where you say you live, which we're currently just went over the 500 mark for registered sex offenders in our county, so it's become quite a task.
Then also, too, the fire department is working on some physical standards for the employees that have been around for some time, not just, when you first apply, you have to meet physical standards, but ongoing. Is the police department going to come up with some ongoing physical standards?
Well, actually, we don't have a set standard. We used to have a physical agility test that you had to go through as part of the testing. It's probably been 15 years ago, but you actually had a guy die of a heart attack going through that. Doesn't mean that you can't still have that standard. But, there are some ADA requirements there, and so we have to be a little careful there. But I am happy to report, though, that we have, through the health and fitness coordinator that the city hired not too long ago, we've been working directly with her. We've developed some great programs within our department, gotten some very good participation in that. We also have a fitness room in our station that the officers use. So a lot of it is self-imposed, but we've had some really good participation in that. So personally, I'd rather see it that way than have to set a standard, make them do it, and we're seeing some very good participation, as I said.
And finally, in the news, of course, there's been a lot of talk about the police and what happened to the Harvard professor and things like that. In Sioux Falls, would that kind of incident ever take place where it was kind of like he said? In other words, can we be confident that when our police officers go to a call that this is being taped so we don't have any ambiguity as to who said what or whatever the case might be?
Actually, that's one great advantage of having the cameras in the cars. All the officers wear a microphone on them. They're required by policy with anytime they have contact with a citizen, be it a call or something they come across, to activate their camera. We may not necessarily get everything on video. You need to actually be in front of the police car to get that, but all the audio. And those,
so
those
go into a house or something?
Absolutely.
Good.
Matter of fact, they've got very good range. I could have my police car parked out in the parking lot here in order to easily pick up all of our conversations. So that's all recorded. It's all digital. And one of those times throughout their shift when they go to one of those hot spots, it automatically is uploaded, and the officers can't get in, tamper with the system. It's all basically locked in there. So I think when we first went to cameras, there was maybe a little apprehension, Big Brother's watching, and maybe we don't want them listening to everything I'm doing. But the officers quickly realized that 99.9% of the time it saves their back more than anything. When we get one of those he said, she said situations, we simply review the tape, and like I said, nearly every time find out that wasn't the case.
Thank you.
Councilor Anderson?
Doug, I've had some calls from residents out in the 6 Mile Road and 10th Street area about that intersection. Who actually has jurisdiction over that intersection, and is there anything that we can do to try to make that a little safer over there?
That currently falls under, well, it's actually outside of the city as far as enforcement. We assisted with that accident report. I assume you're referring to the one here within the last week or so.
There's also been some close calls out there. The business owners out there are really concerned about that intersection.
Yeah, and I know there's actually been a couple fatalities there too over time. But so currently it's not our intersection for enforcement. But,
is that county then, or state, since it's a highway? Or?
Yeah, in that case, well, either one. I think in that case the Highway Patrol took the accident report, but as I said, we assisted with it, but it's their.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Doug, I just have one quick question. I noticed on the sources of funding, very at the bottom is $262,000 for charges for services and goods. What would that be?
You're just talking about general revenue?
Yes.
Well, there's a number of things that we generate revenue from. Animal licenses, taxi license, building moves, sale of accident reports, accident pictures, that sort of thing.
Okay. All right.
And I think probably also included in that revenue was we get $182,000 from TSA that basically is a wash and pays for the officers that do security at the airport. Okay. So that's a big chunk of it.
Okay. Councilor Bennigan?
Just a couple of comments from spending a little bit of time with them. First of all, I'm glad that we've spent the time for the cameras because it obviously keeps them out of court on a regular basis, and they appreciate that. The one thing that surprised me when I've ridden with them, and I don't know if there's anything that we can do to help you with, but the number of times they go back to the same location on a false alarm. It's incredible to me that new buildings or even the older buildings, how many times they go back to do the whole pass-through and how much time they have to spend with electrical problems or with security problems or whatever. Is there anything that we can do to encourage, I don't know, inspections by either building inspectors rather than spending tons of time with the police calls?
Actually, it's ironic that you bring that up. We've been working on a proposal that I hope to bring to this group in the near future to hopefully address some of these false alarms and maybe get some better self-compliance.
I actually called somebody that I know in the cities, and after so many calls, they actually charge someone. After you've had 2 or 3 calls to the same building, they haven't taken care of their problem, they send them a bill for the time that's involved. I'm not sure we're there yet, but there has to be some sort of system to help us with our efficiency, and that certainly derails that.
Well, I guess it's similar to traffic enforcement. You know, if the fine for getting a speeding ticket was only $5, you really wouldn't care, and you'd probably speed a lot. So sometimes there has to be a little pain to